Well, hello. I want to introduce you to a fantastic couple of guests that I've got today. I've got Matt Russell here, who's going to be talking to us about the effects of the budget on 2024, 2025 with businesses. Matt's background, Matt's a chartered accountant and tax specialist, studied the exciting subject of economics at university. So a great background there to kind of give us an insight.
Comes in handy every now and then.
You're going to tell us how things work and why they work and why we're doing them as we talk about the budget. And Sam Miah of Berkshire Financial Planning is our other guest this morning, and look forward to hearing from Sam about some of the changes as to how we protect the money that we've got in our pocket rather than how we earn it to start with. So, gents, Rachel Reeves' budget for 2024. How do you think the greater feeling is?
Well, it's definitely a big budget. The last several budgets have been fairly, not many changes, fairly keeping it all steady. This one, though, really did shake a lot up. A lot of taxes being raised, obviously, the 40 billion. And also, I think just generally, on a big macro scale, it changes the environment where we've been, generally speaking, following the kind of more neoliberal model of economics and, very Thatcher Reagan kind of ethos of a smaller state. This is a much more kind of social democratic position, I think, with this budget, and it's much more big state, more tax and spend. So I think that change is quite a big change that we'll see in the country, really.
We were expecting big changes after 4 years of kind of continuity of government. Do you think that's something that the country was quite ready for?
Well, the voters would say so, I guess, with the way they voted at the election. And I think, not wanting to get into too much on the political side of it, but generally speaking, you could see the public services were struggling. I think no matter where you stand politically. So if you're going to pay for those public services, then the taxes need to be raised for them in some way. So that's there's no way to square that circle.
And I think, as you guys have said, it was expected to be a big one, and I think we had a big lead up to this one. Didn't we? Normally, new government comes into power, and within a couple of weeks, they kind of call their budgets and say, right, this is what we're planning to do. But the government have been planting the seeds for for many weeks and months, I think now. So it wasn't a huge surprise in terms of what we expect. I mean, to be honest, Rachel Reeves went straight in rather than give us the various measures and tax rises that she's going to do. She went in straight with a total and said, right, this budget is going to raise 40 billion in taxes. So we kind of knew what to expect, and then kind of glued to your TV sets for the next hour and a half or however long it was, trying to find out how that was going to be made out.
So the two big pre-election sound bites were very much about people with the broadest shoulders and wealth taxes. Do you think we delivered on that part of the budget, or do you think that was a little bit of undelivered promise there? Well, or we've got more to come on that front?
Yeah, I guess. So when you look at the numbers of where the money's being raised from, employers' national insurance, that increase, that's where over half of it is coming from. So that's the big. They're the big taxes are VAT, income tax, and national insurance. If you're going to do anything large like this, then you have to hit one of those taxes.
Is that just because of the predictability of income for the government from those taxes? Things like inheritance tax, we can predict how many people are going to die, but we can't necessarily predict the estate.
It's more to do with the number of taxpayers actually. So things like inheritance tax and capital gains, actually it doesn't make up a huge amount of the government's annual budget. But the big ones are income tax, national insurance, and VAT. They make up, over the 2/3, I think, altogether, roughly speaking, of the government's annual budget. So they're the real big movers. So if you're going to do anything big, you need to hit those ones. Obviously, coming into the election, already income tax, national insurance, maybe employees, that's come up for debate, had been ruled out, and VAT. Yeah. So all those ones had been ruled out. So they weren't really left anywhere apart from employers' national insurance to go. And I mean, I certainly wasn't surprised when they did that. It was kind of fairly reading between the last, very obvious before the election. That's where they're going to have to hit if they're going to go big.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So before we dig into a little bit more depth, I thought for the first budget, we've just gone past that 100 days in office mark. We hit that first budget, and we've hit quite hard on that. Now, from my point of view, I was looking at things thinking, actually, maybe she'll set the roadmap of where we're going to go over the Parliament, and we'll set the kind of financial vision, a bit like we would do as a business owner. We say, right, over the next 5 years, this is what we need to achieve. And then this is the stages that we're going to go there. We saw a lot of very short-term things that could be implemented almost straight away in this budget. And I thought, actually, what's happening in the next one in 6 months' time? Are we going to hit harder? What's for business owners, the mindset of what's going on around us and the stability. We were just talking before we came on air about the stability of the economy comes down to us feeling like we've got a stable government, stable legislation, stable taxes that we can start to plan for. Do you think we've had any thoughts around that as to what might be coming 6 months down the line, and how, if business owners have got a lot of questions from this budget, is the next one going to raise a lot more?
Well, first thing, I think she's come out and said she wants to do one budget a year, which is a welcome relief from a stability point of view, because again, it's not the budget itself; it's always the lead up to it, as we know. Yeah. And then the feelers come out from the government, and just trying to get a sense of what the public think, and so all of that sort of drags out. So hopefully, if we get one budget a year, that's a good thing. She has ruled out not ruled out the fact that she's not going to necessarily increase any further taxes in the future, because his argument is, I can't really make pledges and promises over the full Parliament, which is fair.
Yeah, I don't actually think I'm going to stick to that. I think
No, and that's why she's sort of, I think, is very coy on that. But we tend to see that, the government's probably in the strengthest position, although, coming into this, it did feel like Labour were already on the back foot, only 100 days into the Parliament, into governmentship, is that they will generally go quite hard in the early days, because we know that actually that's when they've got the most strength and conviction. And then as we get closer to the next election, suddenly we start finding, a little bit of money behind the sofa, and that we can, give back in the pockets of the general public.
It's one of those things that, from my point of view, mentality business-wise, is if you want to grow a business, you have to invest. You have to invest in training your staff. You have to invest in new equipment, new tools, new technology. And you can't have an austerity mindset to growing a business. You can't cut everything back in a business and hope it's going to grow. You need to actually create the capacity for growth. So I was hoping that things like the house building, things like some of the investment reliefs. I mean, we talked last year about Sunak's Super Saver. I was hoping for a little bit more meat on the bones there. So that might be something that's going to come in the next budget, or in the next period of time, to hopefully inspire us a little bit more on that front.
For me, I guess there's two things to say on the next 5 years. I think so. First, I think the budget is very much a gamble on whether they can get the growth. So these things that you're talking about, like the investment, the big investment is going to be made, and there is a spike in growth initially due to the sugar rush, I suppose, of all the spending that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But then over the lifetime of the Parliament, actually, it's going to drop down that growth. So you kind of think if they're going to achieve what they want to do, they need to get those supply side reforms. So things like the planning changes need to happen, and they just need to work to really actually beat those OBR forecasts in a way.
Yep.
And also we've got things in the next couple of days, like the American election that's coming up, that could just completely blow all those growth projections out the water.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a gamble there. So there's that side of it. And there's also the other side of it, which is actually the amount of tax that's being raised. And I mean, so what they do in the budget is they stand, they do the presentation, budget speech, blah, 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 and then they release the budget book afterwards. And that's where you get all the appendices and all the numbers, and that's where all the real detail comes to.
And is that a bit like a school assignment where they've actually put the supporting documentation in there to prove the figures, or is it just...
that's it. You get all the appendices and basically all the numbers. So obviously love going through that bit. That's like Christmas for me, going through those numbers and those appendices. But looking where they've raised, and so I made some notes on where they've raised the money. So from this 40 billion, it comes to actually 39 billion, but what's a billion quid between friends? Yeah. So the national insurance does 25 billion. Capital gains tax changes will do 2 billion. Inheritance tax changes will raise 2 billion. The non-dom things actually set to raise 4 billion. And then you've got the VAT on private schools. That's 2 billion there. And then they're putting money into HMRC. That's going to actually, through additional taxes collected, is going to collect an extra 2 billion. And then you've got other bits and pieces like stamp duty and things like that.
So they're dramatically increasing the HMRC workforce.
Yes.
Which kind of in 2024, 2025, surely we need a lot more artificial intelligence in there to flag stuff up. But that was quite an interesting one.
Yeah, it's the idea is spend to save. So you spend money on new staff and the rest of it, and tax collectors, and then you actually save money overall. So
interesting.
If it must be diminishing returns at some point. 'Cause otherwise, I guess you just pump infinite amount of money into
Everyone works for HMRC.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is, out of those taxes that I just went through, a couple of them, like the VAT, for example, and the HMRC ones, actually, those were actually promised in the manifesto to go against their manifesto commitments.
Right.
So when you might have heard some reports after the budget saying there's a 9 million black hole in the black hole, and that's what they're referring to. They're referring to the fact that a lot of these, some of them have been promised already, and they're kind of potentially doubly promising them, if you see what that means, the spending. So with that in mind, there might need to be future tax increases to actually make up that gap if growth doesn't fill it, I suppose, is the overall.
Yeah.
Overall.
That was the whole thing, premise of the elections. That was for, wasn't it? Just growth. I mean, growth became the new magic money tree, as once it was referred to. And
the interesting thing about growth is always it's a window on the world, isn't it? We can bounce back from COVID and be the fastest growing economy in COVID, but when you zoom out and you look and see how much we were lagging all of the other countries, for example, so growth is an interesting window depending on how we're kind of measuring it. So let's start with the white van man, because it's the Sun Reader's headline is always a penny off a pint of beer. So I'm sure we're all going to celebrate that one. But the interesting thing I saw on the flip side of that is fuel duty hasn't been changed during this budget. So we've got a little bit of stability for the guys that are out there on the road all day, every day, and that taking up a fair chunk of their expenditure.
It's just them to get touched fuel duty every time, every year. Fuel duty just avoid it.
And the thing they do as well is they say, well, next year we're going to cut it. So that goes into forward projections there, and it looks, so things look rosier, but that just never going to happen. It's one of the bigger thing.
So the next thing that's kind of had a massive push recently, company cars moving to electric vehicles and electric vans and things like that. What do we see there on that EV front?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jamie. That's an interesting area because there are some changes, and again, this is something that Rachel Reeves didn't really talk about in her budget speech so much. It's again in the budget book, in the small print, as it were. So one of the big things that HMRC have been kicking around for a while is this double cab pickups. So there's been a lot of
we've been turning American in our choice of company cars.
It's becoming more popular, especially if you're say a one-man band, kind of landscape gardener or subcontractor or something like that in the construction industry. They're quite popular, these trucks,
Ford Rangers, and
and there's been confusion about whether a two-cab pickup, so you've got two rows of seats, whether that is a car or a van. Now, previously, if it's used commercially in the business, it's been considered a van. But there was an attempt, probably I think about 6 months ago, for HMRC to reverse that position. And they said, well, actually, it's a car. That caused uproar because the point is, if it is a car, then you lose all the tax deductions that you get from it being a van. So it's changed the tax landscape of what it can do, and you lose the capital allowances, so you can't write it down fully against your profit. Also makes it a benefit in kind. So
it has quite an impact on several different areas of the business.
Exactly. So the point being, you want it to be a van. That's the key point. So HMRC changed their mind, but then there was uproar from the automotive community, and they backtracked on it. But it actually is in this budget book in the small print saying, well, actually, it's definitely a double cab pickup is definitely a car.
We got that clarified.
Yes.
Does a vehicle being wrapped and things like that signage affect?
No, it doesn't. It
definition?
doesn't. So what does affect it basically is if you're looking, so the tax planning point is if you're looking at buying a vehicle for work, make sure it's not a double cab pickup.
Yeah.
And if you are thinking of down that line, it's got to have just one row of seats. So anything with 2 rows of seats, so unfortunately you're going to have to start strapping your kids to the roof. I think.
Put them in the dog box on the back.
And I think that's what HMRC are worried about, is that they're actually being used, obviously, for personal use, and not. Whereas if you only got 1 row of seats, much less likely to be used for personal use. So that's the gist of it. But it does affect those businesses quite a bit. And we'll see where we go. It wasn't as she didn't announce it in the speech, as Rachel Reeves, so I didn't announce it in the speech. It's not one of those things that
it's not made the front page of the.
Whereas you can imagine maybe that somewhere like the Sun or something, if they heard, if that could be seen as an attack on the self-employed, white collar worker style person.
They're pricey trucks now. They're not a cheap vehicle, so it's interesting to see how that's going to. Because I think that's probably one of the areas that the automotive industries have massive growth. Apart from the electric vehicle side, we're seeing an awful lot more trucks like that. So we said earlier that. The pressure's being put on the employer now, so we've kind of moved from that white van, one man sole trader that's had pretty much sunk below the radar during most of the budget. The self-employed and the sole traders, they've not had too much of a mention in this year's budget. But we start to move to that employer, and the thumb screws have come out from Rachel Reeves' desk drawer by the sound of it.
Yeah, yes and no. So So obviously the headline of the whole budget probably is this employers' national insurance increase. That's the big kind of big ticket item of the whole thing, as we were saying earlier, and that's what everyone's seized on. Obviously, rightly saying that, is it really a tax on just employers, because it does go through to employees? I think they're saying it's 3/4 of it will be passed on to employees. So it's quite a big chunk of it is passed on. But saying that, one thing they did do is they also increased the employer's allowance. Now what the employer's allowance is, that's an allowance that you get every year to offset against all your employer's national insurance. So what that tends to mean is that smaller employers don't actually pay any employer's national insurance at all. And the numbers are quite interesting. So if you, and again, I love crunching numbers. So I did some figures and scrolled them down here. So if you were in a 2-employee business, and both those employees were getting 40 grand a year, under the current rules, you'd be paying around about 3,520 or 30 quid and employer's national insurance a year. Yeah. But under these new rules, you'd actually be paying nothing.
Right. Okay.
So you can see that that's actually probably not what you expect. You're actually paying less tax. And similarly, even if you were...
So where does that break point? So if I bring in my third member of staff...
Well, yes. So
am I then liable for everybody?
Yeah, then you start to go in. And the bigger employers, so if you're looking at, employing 10 plus people, then you're really going to start to feel it.
So we could take that as a real positive for growth for the one-man business or 1 and 2 member staff business to move forward that little bit. There's actually a little bit of encouragement there that, depending on the spin we put on it, that could be a real positive for the smaller business.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. For the smallest businesses, they shouldn't really feel this change. And it is a positive that they can, you shouldn't be put off through this change through hiring your first employee, and I think that's the whole reason it's the
one that small business which is now trying to move into the next step and trying to give. That's where the challenge comes. Matt, explain to us, because again I was reading some of the stats on that regarding the reduction of the threshold where the NIC for the employer starts from down to 912. Because I actually saw, because obviously the big headline is 15% NIC on there, but actually the reduction in the allowance looks like is the one that's going to bring in the biggest share of the revenue.
Yeah, absolutely right, Sam. So it was I was watching the budget at work. Actually, all my employees were outside. I could hear it going on. Anyway, so they announced the increase to 15%. I was like, oh yeah, fair enough. That's going to happen. But then the next thing she announced was Rachel Reeves announced, was that there's going to be a reduction in the secondary threshold from £9,000 to £5,000. At that point, a few
gasps.
I started painting the air blue. I think people outside my office were thinking, what's going on in that? But yeah, so I wasn't expecting that one. I was quite shocked. And you're absolutely right. So that does affect. I think it adds an extra 620 something of tax on each employee, roughly speaking. So yeah, that's where quite a lot of tax is going to be raised.
So the other headline that we've seen plenty about is about national minimum wage. And that's a big conversation point, especially within the hospitality sectors and retail sectors, cleaning industries and some of the service economies at the moment. And that's kind of putting the fear of God into a lot of small business owners as well. So talk to me about national minimum wage.
Well, yeah, so it's increased. One thing I should have jumped out at me is that they're harmonising the ages over time. So eventually the idea, I think, is just to have one national living wage that you can't go below.
Do you think, as a business owner yourself and as a kind of commentator, that there's equal value that a business receives from all workers within the workplace? Because the discrimination conversation is really tough.
Yeah.
But also, if you're training somebody at 16, 17, 18, they don't. Because for me, coming from an engineering background, when you're teaching same with accountancy and financial services, when you're teaching something that's really complex, it takes, very quickly someone can bring value to the business, and there's nothing to stop you paying them more if they're bringing value to the business, so they've got the right attitude. But on the flip side, if you're teaching something complex to someone, it takes a time for them to understand it and to get a grasp of things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So as you say, in my own business, I do use apprentices, and they're brilliant. It's an amazing scheme, and it's really great to be able to take someone in who's complete blank slate, train them.
That's our workforce of tomorrow.
Exactly, and you can really see. That's how I started. I started on a trainee contract. so yeah, that's a really brilliant, positive thing. But if you just say, if I ask you this, if you're an employer and you've got two employees, both being paid the same rate, one that's just fresh out of college, who hasn't had any experience at all, and then someone else who might be a bit older, a bit more mature potentially. Has got some, maybe a couple of years experience behind their belt. Who are you going to go for? It's kind of a bit. So
that could have a knock-on effect to recruitment in some areas.
Yeah, I do worry about that. And you can see, maybe you could look at doing things like potentially providing subsidies, so the business would get. If you take on for every apprentice, you get. Picking numbers out there, £2,000 grant or something.
And Labour had a track record of that back in the Brown and Blair years. A lot of investment for training and European subsidies for training and apprentices. So we might see some of that stuff creep back into.
It'd be a real tragedy if that doesn't. The apprenticeship schemes. Like I say, they're amazing. I think just for the workforce of the future and a great way to get into a profession.
So parity's coming. That's the thing we see on the horizon. Most important thing for business owners there is really understanding their costs and being on top of that. Actually running it as a business rather than there's an awful lot of business owners that have got into a complacency. Do you have the same business that operates the same year over and over and over again, or are you actually in control of where you're going? So I think that for business owners, that puts time to sit down and crunch the numbers and actually take control of the business a little bit more again.
And I think just taking it wider, I think one of the strain. So sometimes with tax changes and changes things like minimum wage, it's the unforeseen kind of consequences of those actions that are sometimes most interesting. So. If you take, for example, hairdressing, there's and first of all, I wouldn't advocate doing this. I don't think it's ethical, and I wouldn't advise anyone listening to this or any of my clients to do this. But there is a current situation where hairdressers are getting people to come into their salon and hire a chair.
Yeah.
Rather than
it's enforced self-employment, effectively.
Yeah. So really, it's kind of like the Deliveroo. Are they really employees? Are they not? So that's where you're entering a big grey area.
Do you think we'll see some HMRC attention in those industries if they're easy wins for them to investigate and look into?
Yeah, potentially there's going to be, and as I said, the HMRC are putting more money into this enforcement. You like to think that it's just sometimes you just.
You could choose your battles for them.
It's true.
But the minimum wage one is an interesting one on there because I said again, it's another one that is being placed upon businesses and employers. So I know we're talking about the really small businesses will be, better off, but if you think about sort of, the medium size and 5 employees is not, I would still class that, say, relatively 5, 10.
Under 10 staff is about 4 million businesses in the country. So although they're not always represented brilliantly in Parliament, they are we joke about the transit van driver to start with, but they are the backbone of the British economy, the small business. But there's some interesting changes there. So one of the stats that I saw last week was about 1,600 businesses being put into liquidation because people wanting to get out of their business. And that's always an interesting conversation because there's 101 reasons why a business either closes or fails. But whatever happens when somebody gets to that stage, if they've made a pot of money, then something happens with it. So, Sam, do you want to talk to us about capital gains tax and how that can affect a small business and what the budget means for that?
Yeah, so I'll probably leave the business and capital gains on Matt, the tax specialist, on that side of things on there. But I said, capital gains is one that I think we expected, on this budget. If there was any assurance and guarantees that you knew the tax rises was going to come, it was going to be the CGT on there, because it was out of kilter with the rest of the tax threshold, 10 and 20% when we got income tax at 40 and 45% in inheritance tax at 40%. So seeing those increases was not a surprise. And I think a lot of the conversation we had with clients on there is that if we are sitting on realised gains, unrealised gains on there, that actually maybe and you were planning to sell down anyway in the next year or two, maybe start bringing them forward and pay on the lower threshold. I was surprised that normally you tend to give with one and take away with the other. So although the rates had gone up, what we have seen is the exemption allowance over 12,000 going down to 6 and now to 3, that I thought perhaps Rachel Reeves was going to increase that, because actually £3,000 gains is not a huge gain in grand scheme of things. And I think it will hit a lot of individuals who are part of the workplace share save incentive schemes quite easily.
I know a lot of people that have benefited over the years when the companies issued shares to the employees and then grown over 10 of 20 years. There's a lot of companies I know that have done that, and people, this is where sometimes the headlines about shareholders and all of these rich money makers, actually, I've got friends that worked in the railways, and when the railways were privatised, they managed to get some shares in the railway or things like that. And this is the whole shareholder conversation affects everything from pensions all the way through to people's little pots of money that are going to kind of take them through retirement. It's not always big evil corporates making millions of pounds, is it?
No, and one of the things about CGT, I think, again, it's the behavioural change on there. Again, what you got to remember is that the revenue only generates that tax if an individual decides to exercise their right to realise those gains. Yep. So we've got lots of property holder owners who, again, perhaps they were going to sell because liquidate their portfolio because of the hassle involved in becoming a landlord and so forth. But now perhaps thinking, well, actually, you know what, I won't sell because the tax has increased. Yeah. So we've got to be careful and get that fine line between the actual tax rates, and I suppose that's probably why it was kept so low for a lot longer, because actually I can see less revenue being generated as a result of these changes than necessarily meets the eye in the initial outset.
So Matt, there's a mindset in the States of having fast growth companies hitting things like the stock market, growing them very quickly, then being absorbed into other companies. And that's one of the things that Sunak in the last couple of governments was very keen for, especially in the tech and the medical sectors, to see those incubators of fast growth businesses. Do you think our approach to capital gains tax and things like that now could stifle a little bit of that entrepreneurialism coming into the country?
Well, I think so. I think what this refers to, in terms of business investment, there's a couple of things, really. I suppose there's the capital allowances that you get, and the full expensing was maintained, which is great for investing. So if you're looking to buy a load of fixed assets or develop a business, that's still there. And also the research and development scheme is also in place. So if you're looking at doing something new and innovative, you will get that tax credit still. So that's all positive. The one area that did change is kind of more towards the end when you exit the business, and touching on what Sam was just saying as well about the capital gains rate. So there's this relief that you get called business asset relief. So when you sell your business, you pay a lower rate of capital gains tax. Now, I kind of suspected that they might actually completely do away with this relief, but they haven't. They've kept it in place. It's going up to 18% now eventually. I think it goes up to 14% next year. Yeah, so and if you think about it, so what often happens is you build a business, and when you sell it, there's actually some money left over. You get money for the shares. It can be quite a big chunk that you get. So you've got £1 million where you can get currently at 10% rate. So that can make quite a big difference on your net take home. I think that with the increase, and this is where when you were talking about a lot of businesses going insolvent, I think actually a lot of that's one of the things you can do if you've got a lot of money locked away in a business is you can actually go through a solvent liquidation process and get that money out at that 10% rate and close the business down. So it's something you do when you retire. If you can't find someone to buy your business, you liquidate it, take the money out, and you get the 10% relief. So I think what a lot of people have been doing, knowing this budget's coming up, and speaking to insolvency practitioners, I know they've been very busy on this side of things, is they've been liquidating a lot of businesses where people might think, maybe I've only got a couple more years left. But now they've brought forward the process.
So timing's everything.
Yeah, and I think now knowing that it's going to go up at the end of the tax year, I think a lot of it will focus the mind, and I think there will probably be a push on insolvencies towards the end of the tax year.
We tend to see a lot around Christmas time anyway, don't we? So it's going to be interesting.
And these aren't businesses that have failed; they've actually been a success.
Yeah,
and they're actually going
using it as a tax vehicle to.
Yeah.
So timing's going to be everything. Now, I thought for me this was a bit of an own goal. So as a uneducated, news-reading economist out of the three of us, and you two have got a lot more on this, but I thought, if you've got a country that you want to grow for the next 3 to 5 years, leaving that in place at 10% encourages an exodus of business owners out of the marketplace. Whereas actually, if you tapered it the other way round for 5 years and said, we're bringing it back in at 18%, so we've got a windfall for the next 3 years, then it could drop to 14%, and then it could go to 10% in 5 years' time. They've got the time to always tweak it a little bit if they need to further down the line. But what you'd see is you'd have business owners that would have to invest for the next 5 years. They'd have to step the game up a little bit with their business for 5 years. And actually, you get the economic growth for 5 years before you start to get some of those exits. If people turn around and do things on the fly, we all know when it comes to accounts and bookkeeping, everything like that, anything that's rushed, you either make a mistake or it's going to cost you some money somewhere along the line. So I think that whilst you guys are trying to get out quickly, as a country, we could have benefited more by having a slightly longer term view on that. There's a popular marketing guy called Rory Sutherland. He's a behavioural scientist with Ogilvy's, and he says, how about the first £100,000 of your salary being tax-free? Because actually, when you start off in the workplace, you can start to build that momentum. Life's more expensive. And then as you get older, you've got more money to spend. So let's tax it higher. And I think the same applies to those business owners. They're going to spend more money in the economy once they take the money out. But let's get the behaviour in a way that people want to invest in their business for a longer term.
I think that's a really interesting idea, actually, Jamie. It's not something, like what the first 100 say.
I'll aim into that one. I'm just not sure when you talk about later on taxing more. They're the if we think about the voter population on there, I'm not sure these the voters later on are going to be choosing for the government who's advocating that they're going to be taxing more as they get older, but. I think the behavioural side of things, I think, is underrated, because again, we talk about the negative. I mean, the whole budget is got a huge enough of negative, press on there. And don't get me wrong, you can't hide behind the fact that there's £40 billion increase in taxes. Yeah. But there are little nuggets, little things, as Matt has mentioned, and which we'll come on to, which there are ways to. There are winners and losers with every situation on there. But I think. Where they're increasing the taxes, I think, because again, capital gains, I think we talk about that. Remember, you only pay the tax if you've made some profit.
Yeah.
Right. So again, quite often I'll sit down with clients on there, again, it has negative, but if there was one good tax to pay, if you like, it is capital gains because you've made a profit. Otherwise, if you made a loss or you didn't make it.
It's the interesting one. When you take, we're all of the same generation, but you kind of look at the generation before us that have benefited massively from the uplift in property values in the last 50, 60 years. And you'll see all the keyboard warriors moaning about I'm like, you've had free money. You've bought a property for 40, 50,000 pounds. One of my friends bought a property for 8,000 pounds. It's now worth £500,000. Why should celebrate your wins? Someone's given you £495,000, and they do want to take a chunk of it. But you've had this.
Yeah, and Sam's absolutely right. The profit makes. If you're not making a profit, you're not paying the tax as a business, and all these tax changes that we're talking about, they are falling on the backs of businesses primarily. But and going right back to the start, if that growth can be there, what business owners want is they want to have more customers and make more sales.
Yep. And stability.
And a stable economy, they want their market to be growing steadily.
Yep.
If that can be delivered, and all these tax changes are like, well, we'll pay them. We'll make do and get on with it.
One of the industries that's really suffered the last 5 years really is the hospitality retail sector. We've seen the changes in buying habits away from the high street. We've seen a little bit of an influx of holiday makers in the UK staying in the UK because of COVID and that period of time after COVID where they weren't travelling so much. So the hospitality industry was taken care of, in inverted commas, through that economic period after COVID. They'd had some changes in VAT and they'd had some changes in business rates. Rachel Reeves touched on that in her budget. So what was the score for hospitality and retail, apart from a penny on the pie?
So the rates, they were still given 40% relief. That's going down from 70%. For a rate of value below 100 grand, I think, but I might be wrong on that. I need to check that figure.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly tough in industry. So things like the minimum wage, employees' national insurance will probably hit you as well. So it's gonna be very tough. And also their market is difficult, isn't it? So if you've got bricks and mortar,
they tend to be older properties in leisure and retail as well. We all like to go to a historic country pub, but the maintenance on that building is going to be a lot more expensive than a new build bar in a shopping centre, isn't it?
I tell you, it adds to your risk, doesn't it, really?
So we're going to see the businesses in that sector that are strong, either strong financing and strong management, and those that aren't quite so sharp on the management side, keeping on top of their costs and managing, even down to the size of a menu can mean the amount of money you've got tied up in stock and how fast something's moving. So I think that the businesses that stay strong in those sectors are the ones that probably haven't leveraged themselves so much, but have also got a strong management in place, and that's quite an important one. So we talked about capital gains and the kind of end of the business cycle. Another popular one for most people, especially when most of us don't think about it early enough in our career, is pensions. But it's a nice way of people to get to the end of their business life and rest a little bit. So, Sam, talk to us about pensions. What were you expecting in the budget?
What were you expecting? I think, again, this was another one, along with capital gains tax, that we kind of expected some changes. It was a lower-hanging fruit for Rachel Reeves. And so leading up to it, there was a lot of conversation I was having with clients, because there was little leaks and so forth coming out about things such as the tax-free cash. So when you get to a retirement age, you can take quarter of your pension tax-free. Yeah. There was this rumor about that's going to be capped at a certain level or potentially be taken away. Again, the challenge you had, there was a few clients. In fact, I read an article over the weekend where someone has thought that was going to happen and decided to take out their tax-free cash. And the headline actually says, "I've taken my tax-free cash. leading up to the budget, I realised that they're not changing it. Can I put it back in? And the answer is no. It's not as straightforward as that. So we expected potential changes to a tax-free cash on there. Although I was never convinced that was going to be the case, and that I did say to my clients, and thankfully, that played out exactly how I thought. The other one is the tax relief going in. So again, as you know, when you contribute £80 as a basic rate taxpayer, you get a £20 essentially top up from the government. So it's free money in sense. But if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you're £60 getting topped up by 40. So proportionately, you're getting better off. The higher earners are better off on there. So there was again conversation to be had where, do we have a flat tax relief going in? So I don't know, maybe 30% or something, somewhere in between. So if you're going to try to be helping out the general workers out there, potentially increase the relief that they get in, potentially no relief at all. So especially if you're not going to get the tax-free cash later on, do you get no relief going in, but like what you do with ISAs on there, but then you've got no tax on the way out. So all these things were talked about on there. IHT one was the one that I expected to be included. So pensions at the moment currently don't form part of your estate on death. I thought they would bring that in at a cap, I don't know, £500,000 or something like that, anything above that. And it's an easy one because a lot of the things about tax changes that happen, as you know, HMRC struggle to implement a lot of these things because of constrained systems, people, involved in that.
That's a perfect example of an attack on doctors. Is that you can just see the headline now, can't you?
Yeah.
Because we're struggling to get doctors back into the NHS because they hit this cap of what they can put into their pension, and now we're going to go and hammer them again. Yeah.
So, they're the defined benefit on there, so slightly different in that sense. But no, look, I just thought the inheritance tax on the pension easing, because at the moment, when you're doing your estate death duty returns on there, you've got all the boxes on HMRC form, what was in savings, what was in investments and so forth, and what's the property value. The pension box is essentially greyed out. So all you have to do is enable that form and suddenly it does the whole calculations for you. So it's an easy one on there. But to go in at with no cap and limit was the one that's probably taken us by a big surprise. So now it's going to bring in a hell of a lot more, individuals into the IHT bracket who don't necessarily, seem are wealthy. If we go back, I suppose take a step back, inheritance tax, just a reminder, is, you get an allowance of 325,000. So anything above that is taxed at 40%. As a couple, you've got an allowance each on there. So essentially, as a couple, providing the estate is below 650,000, there is no inheritance tax. And it was George Osborne a few years back where the Tory manifesto was about, look, we want you to leave more of your hard-earned wealth to your family, so we're going to increase the allowance up to £1 million. And again, we thought, commentators at the time, that all they're going to do is increase the 325,000, which has been frozen since 2009, to 500 each, as a couple. But instead, they included what's called a residence nil rate band, and that then meant that actually you only benefit from this if you are a property owner. But then you kind of think, well, why didn't they just increase it altogether? And one of the things that happens is that as soon as your estate goes above £2 million, that additional allowance that you get being a property owner tapers away for every £2 over the allowance to £1. So essentially, if you get an estate up to 2.7 million, now I know that sounds like very wealthy and a lot, and I suppose to certain people that is, but going back to the baby boomer generation we're talking about on there, a lot of their wealth is tied up in properties that, and again, a lot of my clients have worked extremely hard, run businesses, employed lots of people, paid lots of taxes on there, and they've invested wisely to get to that wealth on there. But I think, one thing that hasn't been highlighted is that with the pension pot now, which is kind of missing on there, is that we're going to get more and more people with the pension pot added to their estate, which will take away that additional allowance of residence nil rate band you've got. So if you think about it, if you've got someone who's got £2 million estate at the moment and £700,000 in a pension pot, at the moment, they are going to pay your 40% on that £1 million.
Yeah.
Right? 1,000 on there. But if that pension pot of 700,000 is now included in the total estate on there, now they've got £2.7 million estate, right? So suddenly you've now got the £1 million allowance that they had is now dropped down to 650,000 because of the tapering away on that. So suddenly the tax bill has now gone to over 800,000 rather than just the 400,000.
Do you think that this is just going to be a generational blip? So we take that baby boomers, we said a minute ago about the baby boomers, making that exponential growth on property. Actually, this is something that might have to be reversed in future budgets, in 5, 10, 15 years' time, because once that wealth transfer has taken place, there's a lot less in the pot for future generations.
Yeah, well, we'll wait and see what happens on that. And I think a lot of people, again, are talking about this has been an revenue generator for HMRC. In fact, as Matt said earlier on, CGT bill, about 3% to 5% GDP comes in as revenue. So it's a small, sort of 0.3 to 0.5. It brings a very small amount of revenue into HMRC. I think the bigger play on this is I've got a lot of clients who have got their pension pot, which is not being used for the traditional purpose of what a pension is designed for. You work hard, you save into a pension, you get to retirement, you draw on your pension and you pay for your bills. Whereas actually from a financial planning point of view, our advice has been very much for anyone who's got inheritance tax liabilities not to touch that pension pot because we know it's free from inheritance tax.
Yeah.
Spend the rest of your estate, bring that estate value down, and then whatever's left in the pension pot will go free from inheritance tax to your family. Now, so that you've got billions of pounds tied up in an instrument which is not being touched on. So I think the bigger play here from Rachel Reeves, I would say, is to try to get people to start spending that money, right? So if you can take that money out, you've got chance of paying income tax on that money. You're going to spend it on in the economy on there. You might actually make outright gifts, so take that money, gift it to the children now, and guess what they're going to do with it? They're going to buy that second property. They're going to invest that money. So I think that is what is missing from here. I think it's more about trying to go back to getting the economy to grow rather than...
Interesting thing. So we zoom back out to that macroeconomic example and we think about house building. So we want the country to be house building. You'd be amazed at how many house building projects have been big people like Legal and General, pension funds backing the house building. We want to boost, GB Energy and the green economy, and we want massive investment there. And who are we going to go to for it? We're going to go to pension funds and various other investors to invest in those things. So if you're extracting all that wealth out of people's pension funds, the flip side of the same coin is, there's not that money there to invest in the structural long-term things we need to grow our business of UK PLC, because actually we've gone down the arcade with it with the kids instead. I know that's a real simplification, but that's kind of the two different sides of that I see, that sometimes the kind of knock-on effects just haven't been factored in.
No, it's the unintended consequences that we've talked about on there that we don't really look at on there. But I said quite often I'll get clients asking me, how can I reduce my inheritance tax? This is pre, these changes to the pension legislation on there. And, my advice has always been, look, in fact, it is to go and spend it. Enjoy it on experiences and things while you're fit and healthy and able to do so. And I hope that this changes will encourage more of my clients to do that. Yeah. The second thing is to, gift with a warm hand in from an inheritance point of view. Now, while you're fit again, able to benefit from that kitchen extension that your children are going to.
So one of the great popular things for people that've got a little bit of money sat around. So we've extracted some money from that pension fund. Sam, what are we going to do? We're going to run out and buy a second home now. Did Rachel have anything to tell us about what we should be doing with that extra cash?
Well, the stamp duty increase again on the second home was something that, again, I think the government just don't want private landlords on there. They're discouraging, if you talk about the capital gains tax, you were able to offset a lot of the mortgage interest on there. So that hasn't helped on there. So no, I don't think buying that second property home is the way out, taking the money out of the pension, because again, it forms part of your estate from inheritance tax regardless. I said it is spend it, gift it outright would be the benefit now. But what we also got to be careful is that we don't run out of money at the same time, because again, the cost of care homes, if you think about how expensive they are, and we are living longer and longer. So again, making sure we get that balance right between the two. And again, I think I want to remind people that, look, the primary objective, what a pension is designed to do, is still intact, right? The government give you a huge encouragement to save into a pension pot by giving you those tax relief when you pay money into it, and it's still going to provide the primary source. It just means the lazy financial planning piece, which was easy for us to say, is, look, don't touch that pension pot. Because it's going to be free from inheritance tax, means that we've got to work a little bit harder to come up with a more...
People are going to have to invest in more financial planning across all their business, across their life. I think the thing that you've taught me in the time we've known each other 3 or 4 years is about cash flow planning your life is as important as cash flow planning in your business, and so getting the right advice and spending time and money on the best advice is something that, especially those with significant wealth, and we talk about £1 million worth of pot, that's where we are in Surrey. That's an average family estate for for a family. So it's something that affects an awful lot of people. So child benefits and the opposite end of the life, from moving from pensions and retirement down to family life. Did we see any changes in the things that
the child benefit made me, not so much this budget, but the last budget? Jeremy Hunt made me laugh when he was talking about how it was going to. So, at the moment, and it's going to stay this way, it's taxed on an individual household, but it's on an individual's tax return as to how it's assessed. Jeremy Hunt was talking about making it a whole household thing, so you'd have a band across a whole household, but it's just that, to me, at the time, and still does seem completely nonsensical. So they reversed that. I mean, but just to think about it, if you were, you go down the pub, you meet someone you like, you come back home with them, have a few glasses of wine, one thing leads to another, and then you're suddenly in a household for a child benefit. So how are HMRC going to know about that? Just every time you get into a relationship with someone, you have to
file a return. How many dependents?
So every time you get to, but that's the same thing. You get divorced, or you go, so it's just completely unworkable to try and get a tax return on a household. So they've backtracked on that essentially. But and I think it's a bit of a sweetener. They've increased the allowance for child benefit to 80,000. So that's a bit of good news there, I suppose, for those that are receiving child benefit.
It's interesting. We've talked about a lot of the limits remaining where they are, and a term that a lot of people hear is fiscal drag. Could you just explain that in...
fiscal drag.
It sounds painful.
Yeah, it does. It is painful. Yeah, and governments love it because it's you don't have to do anything for it to happen. So at the moment, we all get a tax-free allowance. Generally speaking, some people don't if you're earning a lot of money, but £12,570 a year. So a year you can earn that amount tax-free. Now, what used to be the case, and Rachel Reeves has confirmed that this will be the case, interestingly, just in time for the next election, is all these bands, they used to increase with inflation, making you no better or worse off in real terms, was the idea. But those rates have been frozen now. So what it means is as your salary keeps increasing, more of your income gets brought into tax. This creates additional revenue for the Treasury. So, and the reason they like it, and the reason it's quite politically nice thing to do, it's politically an easy thing to do, is because you just don't have to do anything. You just say, well, we're going to keep the bands the same.
it's a bit like turning around saying it's someone else's fault, isn't it? The Bank of England are in charge of inflation, and it's their fault. The other department down the hall there are to blame, not the Chancellor.
Would have gotten away with all of this pesky inflation,
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's fiscal drag in a nutshell, really.
And it's the one that doesn't make the headline. That's the thing. If you think about how much energy and headlines you saw about these tax rises on the fact that our personal allowance has been frozen for so many years, and coincidentally, as Matt says, it's only going to start increasing again just before the next election. So I suppose if there's any sort of bit of positive to take away is the fact that at least that's not going to be extended, because I thought they were going to increase that to 2030 and push that can down the line, really. But it's the one hurting. And again, we go back to the inheritance tax one on there. When you've got a £325,000 allowance, property prices down in South, as we know, very easily you fall into that category. So and those fiscal drags are the ones that are going to bring more and more people paying taxes on there. It's the one that it's the silent assassin that's going to be hurting people's pocket. It's the inflation ones that we don't see, whereas the big headlines is the one that unfortunately is the one that,
when you see that line on your pay slip, it's the one that people are kind of reminded every single month.
Exactly. But you don't get another one. What will be nice is what you would have been had the personal allowance
like in line with the club card points of your tax bill. You should have paid this. You've actually paid this. That's an interesting way of doing it. You might actually win a little bit more politically like that and turn around and say the effect on the economy has been, you're £700 better off.
Want to bring that one to headline.
I don't know if you remember, you used to get like an annual statement from HMRC saying what they'd
spend your money on.
That was really useful.
Save some money by not sending you the letter now.
They got rid of doing that. But that was quite an interesting way of seeing how actually what you paid in tax, how that's been spent.
There's a couple of.
Did they used to make you feel a little bit better? Thinking, I paid a lot of tax on there, but at least it's gone to good cause.
Yeah, those potholes. I should have my name beside, like buying a brick for the county. Should have my name beside the pothole. So there's a couple of quick areas I want to touch up on before we wrap things up. IR35 has been a conversation for a long time around who's inside and who's outside. We touched on how our hairdressers could find themselves in a sticky predicament. But one of the things I've been hearing an awful lot about is the guys that are using an umbrella company, and all of a sudden they're now paying more national insurance because they've been working as a contractor, working through an umbrella company, and they're being hit by this little bit of a tax rise, which is kind of right. But umbrella companies seems to be something that'll be on the horizon.
Umbrella companies are a definite target. If you Google HMRC and umbrella companies, there's a big warning basically posted saying, we don't like umbrella companies essentially, and you shouldn't be using one. If you are and there's any advertisement that we can make you pay lower taxes. So it's a big red flag. You shouldn't really be going anywhere near them. They're probably a tax avoidance scheme.
That's interestingly, with the NIC changes to the employer, and then could we get a situation whereby the employer is encouraging people to go down that route more than take them on as employees, which takes it off them.
Well, I guess it depends if you're inside or outside IR35, and so the umbrella company is technically the employer. But it's
a whole minefield.
Yeah, and Rachel Reeves specifically mentioned umbrella companies and clamping down on those in terms of recouping more money. So that's a real area. I wouldn't advise. You have to be very careful if you're going down that.
The other interesting one you made note here was about the investment in debt collection and compliance at HMRC, but also the flip side of that, they're raising interest rates on outstanding debts.
Yeah, so the interest rate, has been previously been set annually. They're going to start setting it quarterly as well, so there's going to be more regular updates. And I guess it's another bit of a stick to get people to pay the taxes earlier. So that's historically, HMRC, and in my experience, tend to be the last creditor to be paid. And if you're running a business,
you've got to keep the lights on and the fuel in the van.
Exactly. You got to pay those suppliers first. your taxes tend to be calculated later, which is something HMRC are trying to bring forward, making tax digital. But because they're calculated later, they tend to be the last thing that gets paid anyway, and then they've got to run off. And so there's the bulk of unpaid taxes out there. I guess this is an incentive to try and pay early.
Interesting one, as you say, bit of the stick coming out at the end of the budget. So, Sam, tell me some positives from this year's budget. What are you taking away as something that we can actually
positive? Well, look, I think, strangely enough, keeping a lot of things frozen in an environment where taxes and rates are rising is a positive to take away. So, we've touched on the national living wage going up on there. The fact that personal allowance is going to be frozen until 2028 now, and that's going to increase in line with inflation. ISAs and pension allowances, what you can actually contribute into tax-free or tax advantage product wrappers is still beneficial. So again, you can save potentially up to 60,000 into a pension plan or 20,000 into an ISA, and shelter from income tax and capital gains tax while it's growing is still it's a positive one on there. Business owners like ourselves, corporation tax again is staying up to 25% is still a positive one from that point of view. Again, it quite easily could have tweaked that one. I would say those are the positives to take away, is that fact that they could have gone harder. I suppose, they could, especially with things like capital gains tax.
Hold your breath on that one.
Yeah, exactly. We've still got, few more budgets to come.
Yeah.
The big surprise for me is actually they didn't touch dividends, and they didn't increase. I was pretty certain they were going to harmonise the income tax rate of dividends with other investment income. So, at the moment you pay 8.755% if you're in the basic rate on dividends, and you get a dividend allowance of 500 quid. They'll probably keep the allowance because they don't want everyone who's getting a couple of dividends doing tax returns. But I'm surprised they didn't harmonise that with the other income tax rates. I think that's going to be an area where if things don't go as expected with the growth, I think that's where they're going to revisit, I'd imagine. And really interestingly, actually, in the budget book, they confirmed the rates for in general investment income. So that'd be things from like rental income and your savings interest. But they didn't explicitly confirm the rates were staying the same for dividends. So
they've left the door open to come back and tweak that at some point.
Yeah, so I imagine that would be an area they might look at.
And does every change that they decide to bring in need kind of budget approval or to make it onto that budget desk, or is that something that they can just put white paper through a few months' time?
Yeah, so there's two ways. So generally speaking, everything that's going through the budget now, we put into what's called the Finance Act. That Finance Act is then presented to Parliament, and it shouldn't pass. If it doesn't pass, it brings the government down because, and with the majority that Labour currently have, that shouldn't be an issue. So the Finance Act to be passed, that we put into legislation. There are some areas where so we were talking about double account pickups, for example, earlier, where HMRC will try to clarify legislation or issue their interpretation of the legislation. If it's not clear, so it wasn't 100% clear, is a double cab pick up a car or a van? Now the legislation makes it clear it is a car. So but where it's grey, sometimes HMRC will issue clarifications. So it's not always written into law, but generally speaking, and if it's an area of contention, then
it needs to be firm in
the other area as well is where stuff so it's written into law. Then what we'll see is where there are issues of contention. That those might go to the courts, so they go to the HMRC tribunals, and even to the Supreme Court.
So we create a precedent through law rather than having to pass it as an act.
Yeah, and looking at those legal precedents is key as well.
Isn't that what the private schools are?
Well,
take it through. I can't see how
it's there. I think everyone needs them happy. So I think it's the farmers as well. Putting a court case together, but I mean, I'm very. You can't say to a government, you change the law.
Exactly.
The whole point of a government is to change the law. I would have thought, but I'm not a lawyer. So,
any other positives from you that you've taken away? What's apart from there'll be more work for accountants?
Accountants
windfall time
again for another 5 years because there's loads. I mean, and in seriousness, there are quite a few tax planning opportunities now. So after the budget, I was getting in touch with my clients to kind of advise them on what's going on and what they need to be looking at. So if you're a limited company, for example, you're a director of a limited company, one thing you need to be checking and making sure that you're doing is getting the employment allowance, because that's going to become really key with the increase in national insurance.
Yep.
If you're, and to get it, you need to make sure you employ at least one other person. It can't be a single director company, so you need to get someone else. So that's an incentive to employ someone.
So a proactive accountant now is more important than ever.
Well, I would say that. Well, you said it for me, James.
Just endorsed it. It's true.
Know.
It's true, though. And it's the same with financial planning for our future.
Yeah, exactly. I use the term lazy, estate planning on there. It was quite easy from an advice point of view. Once you got the advice to say, look, once you got a pension, leave that where it is. Now we actually have to come up with more strategic planning pieces using things like trusts and trust wrappers to try to extract money out of your estate and reduce the tax. But as you said, it's been a big budget. It's a big gamble in will it pay off? As Matt, I think, mentioned earlier on, the OBR predicts that GDP is going to go up initially and then tapers off. So we need to get that growth going to make it work. For financial planning side of things, I think one of the biggest challenge we've always had is the distrust and in retirement planning that we've always had with pensions. I'm never going to live until that time, or they're going to move the goalposts. So at the moment, you were able to access your pension from the age of 55, increased to 57, going up to 58, which is generally about 10 years before state pension age on there. So again, quite often you get that feedback from clients saying, well, they're just going to move the goalpost, and these changes that are happening again puts more distrust in in the whole retirement planning piece on. Then the government's just got to be very, very careful that we don't get to a situation whereby actually people don't plan for their future, plan for their retirement, and actually the governments end up taking the burden on themselves.
It's quite funny you pick up that point about our attitude as a country to saving.
Yeah.
And you think back, just a little segue that, after the wartime, the National Savings and Investments Bank was a way of the government bringing cash into the government coffers to allow them to borrow, to build, to do all the things that they needed to do. But it generated a whole generation of people that were focused on saving. Yeah. And if we hammer the conversation about pensions and inheritance and all these type of things too much, you actually stifle people's ambition to improve their lifestyle. And I think that kind of brings me to my positives, which is turn the TV off, walk away from the newspapers, sit down, think about your business, think about what you want to achieve, and then get your head down and go and do it. Because if you're focusing on any of these things, whilst we've had a great conversation, we need to be aware of it as business owners. We can't make all of our decisions based on the fact that, I'm going to pay this tax or that tax. We've got to turn around and say, the lifestyle that I want is this. Yeah. Now I'm going to go out and achieve it, and I'm going to give the quality of life I want to. We've all got young kids and things like that. And that's what drives us, not negative news. And I think the effect at times of all the negative stuff, we've just looked at a few different areas where actually for startup and small businesses, there's some real great opportunities there. We've got to look harder for the opportunities and kind of keep in control of the costs in the business as well. Yeah,
the old age of saying, don't let the tail wag the dog, don't let the tax dictate what you plan and don't do. But planning is the key, whether it's exiting business in few years' time, rather than just deciding, right, today I'm going to stop. And I think, again, if we take a step back, look, this is a budget, as I said, today, we're going to have at least 5 more budgets, for over the next 5 years on there, and who knows what the rules and legislation will come along in the past, and we will react to those things on there. But I think there's ever a time, and reminder to make sure we diversify. Okay, whether it is our income streams when it comes to the businesses, things have moved. Times have changed all the time. We'll talk about the retail space on there. Businesses are having to adapt. Rather than have endless amount of stocks with lots of things, capital being tied up on there. Again, what is selling, what is working, and diversify. Again, so often I would hear from people who say, "Well, my business is my retirement.
Yep.
Again, and all it takes is one slight change on there, and suddenly, a huge chunk of your retirement fund is wiped away. So diversify, engage with financial planners and tax advisors to make sure that, again, we are staying abreast of them. There's so many stuff. I mean, we've barely touched on the surface of some of the things that we can do. I mean,
we haven't even mentioned farmers.
Yeah, exactly.
that was a whole tin. It's interesting. I come from a farming background. My grandparents and great grandparents are farmers, and I know the effect of the farms were sold to benefit the 9 children that inherited it, grandchildren. It was spread between the 9 children, but once that asset's gone. But as we said before we started, Matt, there's a wide variance between the people that own farms, and I think for the working family farmer, you want to see that asset passed down. But there's been some fantastic advantages for people.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag on that front, isn't it? Because you can see the logic on one hand. Yeah, I think I was reading in the papers today actually about Dyson's got a load of farms, and he's very unhappy about.
Also got a lot of factories out in Singapore and places like that for manufacturing. Hardly the proponent of Great Britain PLC.
Dysons and Gerald Clarksons and others of this world who potentially think, well, maybe they should pay a little bit of inheritance tax if they're putting their money into these farms. But then you, like you say, you've got the people who don't make much income on a yearly basis, because you need it. From my understanding, we've read a lot about farming over the last couple of days. So you need a lot of acreage to get the farm to work for you, and it's that acreage that's where the value is.
I've got friends that have had crops that have grown a whole year, and then a period of bad weather, and the whole of a crop of blackcurrants or something like that is kind of just wasted. So your income for the year can just walk out the door.
I mean, I would say, especially. I would say if you are a farmer, it's worth getting in your double cab pickup, driving down to
Westminster.
Hi, but just because I'm sure there must be planning opportunities here to make sure that everything is okay for you. Because, like Sam was saying, inheritance tax, key bit of advice is give it away. So if you're looking to retire, I guess 60, 65, pass it on. I'm sure you could do that with the business and pass it on to your kids earlier, rather than just
It's the other one that they get you on is the gift with reservations, so forth. If you are still gifting and still benefiting from the assets,
it's a very unique industry, because again you might have properties on the farm that can increase the value. You can have staff that are in a tied property to their job, so you've got the asset of value of the additional property, but it's tied to having somebody in there, and it's quite there's a lot of different plates spinning in that place.
And the problem you've got is if you want to pay the IHT on that, how many acres of the farm do you sell to to pay that tax bill? Potentially, do you have to completely get rid of the farming business itself? No one's going to want a little corner of your farm, are they? So it's the longer term knock-on effect. Whereas at least with for example, the pensions IHT, which again we haven't touched on that. I mean, there's just so much to cover off. Is that HMRC have essentially said that the inheritance tax for people with the estates with the pension, the tax will come directly from the pension pot. Right. So they're taking that money out before it's even been distributed. Now, on one hand, that is great, because if you actually had your beneficiaries to extract £100,000 out to pay the inheritance tax for 100,000, well, actually that 100,000 would be deemed as income. Depending on whether it's pre or post age 75 on there. So suddenly you've got double whammy on that side of things on there. But actually, from physical assets, and this is the biggest challenge we get with landlords who've built up estate values of bricks and mortars, that actually, in order to pay the tax bill before the estate could be wound up, you've got to find the money out. So again, suddenly we can start seeing things like life insurance policies in trust becoming a big part playing from a financial planning point of view, because that way the money can be paid out directly to the beneficiaries who can settle the tax bill with HMRC, and then potentially retain the value of the farm or the properties that they've got. So
it's going to take some thinking time, but
there's sort of planning on there, and it does, we do like getting involved in those creative financial planning piece on there. Looking forward to it.
We'll come back and talk to you after you've done your next one and plotted and schemed and worked our way around. Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. I've really enjoyed our time this morning. So I was with Matt Russell from Woods Russell Accountants based in Basingstoke, tax and chartered accountant, and Sam Miah from Berkshire Financial Planning.